If you're watching this video, you're likely a program director or a university assessment committee member that is looking for more information on how to evaluate your programs. Cumberland University has done a really nice job of providing all faculty with training on course level assessment, and that's done on an annual basis through our CADs. There's a YouTube series that the University Assessment Committee had put together on course assessment. So if you're brand new to course assessment, I encourage you to check out that video series. We'll try to put a link in the bottom of the description of this video if you haven't watched those. But for those of you that are program directors and University Assessment Committee members, this video will hopefully be a helpful resource for better understanding how Cumberland goes about program level assessment. So one of the first things that we want to take a look at is, what does the University Assessment Committee do? Our members assess both academic, and it looks like members are also going to be assessing non-academic programs across the university. Over the last few years, this assessment has only occurred on the academic side, but it looks like we're moving in a direction where all programs at Cumberland in higher education need to be assessed, and probably rightfully so. The University Assessment Committee also does periodic training. As mentioned, all faculty have been taken through training on course assessment, but as the university hires new faculty, there's a need to train them on course assessment, which occurs in every course for every academic year. Maybe not every section, but for every course in an academic year. Obviously, just like every other committee, have bylaws that we follow, so we review and update those. And one of the big objectives, and this is kind of where the program directors and the University Assessment Committee kind of intertwine with one another, the UAC members review and provide feedback on all program assessment documents, which what we call PADs at Cumberland. We'll talk a little bit more how that's done, but it's the program director's responsibility to review and consolidate all that program assessment into one document and submit that to the UAC. As well, the UAC compiles data and reports findings to the SACS COC for accreditation. And then as well, we certainly don't meet when it's not necessary, but when we do meet, we get work done. As well, currently the UAC is chaired by Lori Dishman, and she has done a phenomenal job of radically changing how program assessment and course assessment is done at Cumberland, and we are so much further ahead because of her work on the committee, and the university is indebted to her for all of that work. So all that being said, if you are asked to eventually be on the UAC, nobody works as hard as Lori, so we are certainly thankful for all the work that she does, particularly in compiling data and reporting those findings to the SACS COC. This part and really kind of parallels what's in the course assessment program, and much of this presentation really also parallels the course assessment with specific modifications and changes for what's really important at the program level. So we know, and this really comes from President Stump, why do we assess, or what's the metaphor for that? Well, we're going to weigh the pig, we're going to feed the pig, and then we're going to reassess. As it applies to program assessment, we're going to assess our candidates, we're going to teach them, or we're going to give them resources, we're going to do something with them over the course of their time at Cumberland, and then we're going to evaluate them at the end. And then we're going to feed all of that back into our program, hopefully to improve the program. Or in that case, at the course level, we're going to assess them in some way. We're going to teach them, we're going to provide them with knowledge and resources. We're going to evaluate them at the end, and then feed that back into the course. So it works the very same way as at the program level. Linda Susky, this is, talking about course level assessment, we're really just sort of modifying, her quote from 2013 to really look at program level assessment. And again, the principles apply, so what are we doing? Well, program level assessment is assessing learning in all students, not across the course, but across the entire program of study. And not just learning, but it's debatable whether we should also be looking at other operational objectives. That could be anywhere from job placement rates to program satisfaction, among other things. So we potentially look at learning objectives, operational objectives, and just like at the class level, in this case, where the difference is, it's the program director in coordination. It's not just the program director that does all of this. It's the program director that coordinates with the faculty within that program and identifies specific program objectives that are going to that are important to the learning outcomes for that program and the assessment means for targeting those objectives. And then you're going to report those results in aggregate to be able to get a big picture of the program's strengths and weaknesses. That's the idea. So it's very, very similar to the course level assessment, but in this case, we're really focusing on program level assessment. We do that not through student learning outcomes, but in this case, PLOs, program learning outcomes. And we do that through our program assessment spreadsheets, but that document is, instead of a CADS, it's a PAD, so program assessment document. And again, to iterate, it's the program director, the PD, that really heads that up in coordination with all of the full-time, and I'd probably add as well the adjunct faculty that are within those programs. So the program director is going to coordinate with the full-time faculty and the adjuncts. And really, if we're doing a good job of that, then it's the program director that is making sure that all CADs are completed for that program, and then taking information, data, results from those CADs, and then feeding that into the program assessment. And this is a two-way street. So, course level assessment feeds into program assessment, which feeds into our institutional learning outcomes, and vice versa. We want to make sure that our institutional learning outcomes feed back into all the way down to our programs and into our courses as well. We've mentioned this, the idea of PADS. I know that, for program directors and those that are on the UAC, there's a lot of acronyms that are thrown around. So through repetition, we just get used to this. CADS, again, our course level assessment. PADS, our program assessment document sheet. It is a spreadsheet format used for tracking student learning across the program of study. At the course level, I think if I'm not mistaken, there's 5 levels or 5 columns. At the program level, we have 6 columns across that spreadsheet, and I've got a screenshot here in just a moment. But the additional, back up just a moment, the additional column is for our alignment with CU's institutional learning outcomes. So for every program objective, program learning outcome, PLO, we're going to tie that to a primary and a secondary institutional learning outcome. And then those that have done CADS before, these other 5 are program learning outcomes, assessment methods and tools, the standards of comparison, or our target level, the benchmark that we're trying to measure against, reporting our results and findings, and then feeding that into our action plan. In other words, how are we going to use these results? These last 5 are the same with our CADs. So the way that looks, as I mentioned, the first column is the only one that's different. So you're going to have a primary and a secondary. And if I'm not mistaken, I think there's a drop-down menu in that spreadsheet. If not, there's definitely a tab at the bottom of that spreadsheet where you can see all of the institutional learning outcomes. So for every specific PLO, we want to tie that to an institutional learning outcome. Not going to spend too much time on our SMART principle. If you're brand new to the SMART principle, go back to the course level assessment. There's some really good information in that video series on really teasing out what we mean by specific, measurable, aggressive, or attainable, results-oriented, and time-based. But this is just kind of goal setting 101, if you will, how we want our benchmarks or our learning outcomes to be evaluated against. So Uh, Spend a little bit of time if we can, and I know we're going at a pretty quick pace. Wanted to keep this fairly brief, but I wanted to give a few tips and ideas for program directors and as well for university assessment committee members that are evaluating those paths. Some things to look for, some ideas to think about. So some tips on uh, for each when we're completing the paths and then when we're reviewing the paths. So one thing to keep in mind when we're setting up a specific, if we can back up here for a moment, a specific benchmark that we're trying to target. You see here 1A, 1B. We want to have multiple measures or different ways to assess any one particular learning outcome. We want to try to make those as objective and direct as possible. But for example, if we had uh, a particular learning outcome that was being measured by a national certification exam, we might be able to, as a secondary, use a more subjective or indirect measure such as surveys, end of course surveys or exit interviews with students. We wouldn't want to use two indirect measures, but when combined with one another, it's very possible that those can have kind of a synergistic effect, if you will. So try to use multiple methods. And two isn't the limit. We could have two or three methods, but we certainly want to have more than one. We want to choose assessment methods and tools that are very specific to the intended program learning outcome. So as mentioned, if that national certification exam does not support the learning outcome, don't use it. We want to make sure that our methods of measurement are both feasible and manageable, across the program of study. As well, uh, program directors, and when we're reviewing those paths, we don't want to just see that all glowing accomplishments. That's great if programs of study are just absolutely crushing it and killing it. But we certainly don't want to do that, in a way that overshadows areas that really need to be improved. Uh, it's important to recognize, and this applies to the course level and the program level, that an area of needed improvement is not a bad thing. Not measuring is a bad thing. When we identify that something is an area of needed improvement, we can use that as a strength, if you will, because one, we've identified it. We lay out an action plan, a feasible action plan for going back and targeting. And then we go back and feed the pig, we weigh it again. Feed the pig, weigh, do something, and then weigh the pig again. So in that sense, we don't want to think of areas of needed improvement or weaknesses, if you will, as that's a bad thing. So to iterate, it's the only bad thing in course and program assessment is not measuring. And we want to make sure, finally, that we're following best practices in our field. So in that case, if the idea that keeps coming to mind is a national certification exam. If that is required for students to go out and practice in a particular field, a certification or licensure exam. So for example, students coming out of an athletic training program or a nursing program or any other program that requires a certification or a licensure exam, that should probably work its way into the program level assessment. It's a best practice in that field. So very important to have those. As far as moving on from the benchmarks and how we measure, but talking a little bit about reporting the data and results. We want to be clear and direct in those measures. We don't want to use a lot of verbiage this ties into the third point. One direct way of doing that is provide, your quantitative analysis, provide numbers, provide the data. Don't just say that for this particular PLO, that students met the benchmark. Mention that students met or did not meet the benchmark, and then provide the data as well. So a good example of that might be, we might say that 30 of the 60 students in the program, and then of quantify that, 50% achieved at target level of 75% based on the common rubric, or 40 out of 50 students demonstrated growth in the program based on pre-test to post-test scores, average scores, and then we might go on and actually report what those average scores were, both the percentage, the raw scores from pre-test to post-test. So this would probably be a better way to provide those results. Beyond actually reporting the results, we always want to feed back into our program. That's the idea. It's a feedback loop. So, particularly for any targets that are not met, and again, it's not a bad thing that targets are not met. We want to come up with an action plan for how we want to move that forward. So what might that look like in a program? And this is really where the UAC comes in. So if we identify in a PADS that the program director and faculty have not identified it, we might make a recommendation of add or modify an assignment. Change the format or delivery of content. This was a big thing this past academic year. With a lot of courses being moved from on-ground to online. And as we anticipate moving forward, maybe considering how we might do that, in a hybrid format, or managing courses that are on ground and being able to have an online parallel for that course. We might change textbooks, change instructors, provide recommendations. And what we want to make sure that in those action plans is we identify not just what the action plan is, but who's going to implement it. When is it going to be implemented? And when we mention those things, making sure that as program directors that we go back and we actually follow through with those action plans. So beyond those that aren't met, we don't just wash our hands of PLOs that are met. We constantly want to be challenging students in our programs, looking at ways that we can not just increase rigor, but continue to figure out ways that we can better help them take what they learn in the programs and be successful beyond their time at Cumberland. So maybe we look at job placement rates, for those targets that are met. Maybe we increase the rigor, that target level of achievement. There's lots of ways that we can continue to address those targets that are met beyond just stating in a PADS ongoing assessment will occur. And then sort of a final note on our program assessment document rubric. So program directors, there's a common evaluation rubric that the UAC is going to use when evaluating your programs. And I will exit out here in just a moment, but what we're looking at is there's a variety of measures here, and then we're going to evaluate on essentially a four-point scale from insufficient to excellent. But what is it that the UAC is looking for? So if we exit out here for just a moment, and just take a moment and we'll walk through the evaluation rubric. What we want to see is that there's at least 3 program learning outcomes for every single program. Some programs might have 5, some might have 6, but we want to see that there's at least 3. We want to see as well that those program learning outcomes use action verbs, that go beyond just that students will learn in the course. Well, what do we want them to learn? How do we want them to learn? Maybe we want them to be able to demonstrate a particular competency, and demonstrate carries a different connotation, that it is an actual skill that can be observed that the student can apply. Versus understand, there's a cognitive component to that. So we want to pick very specific action verbs that really help us identify what we want students to know when they come out of the program. Again, we've already mentioned this. We want to see that for every single PLO, that there's multiple means of assessing, and some ways that we can get feedback on that. Are there direct versus indirect, formative versus summative sort of measures? We want there to be some variety in there, but erring on the side of more direct measures. Number 4, the assessment methods and procedures are feasible and appropriate to the assessment. So again, they need to be, all of those measures and methods of measuring that PLO needs to be specifically tied to the PLO. Anyway, the benchmarks and targets, they're time-based. There's a specific period of time and when that target is going to be measured. Is it going to be measured on an annual basis? Is it going to be measured every semester? Is it going to be measured at the end of the academic cycle? When is it going to be measured? And did the program director follow through with that? We want to make sure that sufficient data is provided. So again, as the program director, as the evaluators of those paths, we want to see that that there's quantifiable data provided. That goes beyond just that the target was unmet, or that 80% of students, 80% of how many students. So let us know how many students were in the program, or how many students were assessed in that academic cycle. You can provide ranges. So if they're taking a certification exam, if you will, what was the min, what was the max, what was the range of scores, what was the average, if you want to calculate standard deviation, provide some of that information so that it paints a clearer, a more complete picture, if you will, of what the data suggests. Identify your action plans for all unmet targets and those that are met. So again, those action plans, how we want to move forward, needs to be tied to any and all PLOs. There's a series of narrative questions at the bottom of that spreadsheet, and that's part of the feedback loop. So what did we learn from this assessment cycle? How does it tie back into the previous assessment cycle? How are you going to move forward with any unmet and met objectives? So all of that needs to be provided. It's very helpful to read those narratives. And then some ideas on action plans. So what did that program director provide as far as how are we going to move this program forward? So just some recommendations maybe there on some ways to be able to do that. Those are some of the things that we are looking for. And then I guess just to wrap up, some ideas to keep in mind. So in review, I'd say the same principles and concepts that we use in course assessment apply to program assessment. We've simply modified the CADs to a PADS with the addition of the institutional learning outcomes. We still want our measurements and the way that we measure to follow the SMART principle, those sort of things, how we feed back, it parallels the course assessment. So again, if you're new to course assessment, go back and watch that video series, and we step you through how to do course level assessment. But by the time you become a program director and then join us on the UAC, it's really the program directors that are consolidating all that across the program, and then the UAC is going to help evaluate and provide feedback for the program assessment. Similar to course assessment, program assessment occurs every single year for every program. Now, the caveat to that is not every program, at least currently, is going to receive feedback every year. The UAC, at the present time, we divide up half of the programs, and the UAC members provide feedback to half of the programs during the odd years, and then the other half of the programs during the even years. Now, that being said, the chair, so in this case at the present time, Lori, when she when she receives all of those pads, Dr. Dishman is going to give, very likely going to give some feedback to each program director. But that being said, more substantive feedback from each of the committee members happens every other year. So that's kind of how that works. The UAC does not review the CADs for each course. That's really a program director's responsibility. But as the UAC members, we do provide feedback, as I already mentioned, every other year to those program directors. So every other year, the program director is likely going to get feedback from probably 3 people. The UAC chair, and then 2 of the committee members. So it's really worked out well. Last year when we implemented this, there was some great feedback provided. So the more that program directors put into their program assessment and really do a quality job of assessing their programs, the more content that we have to work with as the UAC. And then those UAC members, the more that they can become familiar with, quality program assessment, quality course assessment, the better feedback that we can provide those program directors. So, and then just to wrap up, program assessment is a tool that, that we feed back down into the course level, but it also feeds up into the institutional learning outcomes and vice versa. The institutional learning outcomes feed back down and around to the institutional learning, the program and the course level assessment. So it's really a two-way street there. Program assessment, course assessment, and institutional or university assessment are really powerful tools for making sure that we're serving our students, we're providing them with a quality product, and we're setting them up to be successful when they leave Cumberland and beyond their time here. So hopefully that was helpful to each of you, for program directors and the University Assessment Committee members. If you need more information, want more information, feel free to reach out to any of the University Assessment Committee members, the University Assessment Committee chair. And we have some great program directors across campus that are doing a phenomenal job, absolutely phenomenal job with program assessment that they would be able to help. Happy to help, I'm sure, other program directors. So good luck with your program assessment, and let's have a great academic year. Take care. Bye.